So my thesis for 2025 is that it's the year of succession and that of also transition and succession planning. And I've received a handful of inquiries over the past couple of weeks about buying and selling coffee roasting companies. And these conversations have further solidified this belief that in 2025, it's the year of transition. These sellers have been folks that are, doing sub $1 million in sales all the way up to groceries doing north of $10 million. And interested buyers have been running the same sort of gambit in terms of their size and their interest. And before I go on, if you've never considered selling your business, you might not understand or realize how tender of a conversation it can be for sellers. But the harsh reality is that it is it is just business when you're selling a business. It's strictly that. But for sellers, it's their business. They put blood, sweat, and tears and broke their back trying to stand the thing up. And having a conversation about selling can feel like an exposing and delicate thing. And so it's important to acknowledge that for sellers that that's what's happening. As I facilitate some of these conversations, I've learned a few things about both sides of the conversation, both on the sales side and on the buyer's side. So buyers commonly underestimate the timeline it takes to source and close a deal, expecting 3 to 6 months instead of 9 to 12 plus. Nearly every conversation I have with an interested buyer, the question comes up, how long is this going to take? And my answer is always depends. It depends because it depends on how quickly we can find an appropriate deal for you. It depends on where you're trying to purchase this at. And so this could take between 3 to 6 months to source and then another 3 to 6 to vet and come to an agreement. And the main reasons for this is that closures owners, sometimes coffee roastery owners don't have tidy data rooms. And I'll share more about that in the future, but they also aren't typically super organized and don't have the cleanest ownership structure either. Maybe there's 4 or 5 owners that have X% and Y% and Z%. And so sourcing a deal can take a while due to owners not having clarity into these things. And then it's not easy to determine whether or not it's even worth exploring this deal that's in front of us. So because of that, it can take a little bit of time. So that's one. The second thing is that oftentimes buyers can struggle to determine a buying criteria in terms of what they're looking for. Oftentimes they can give you some sort of rough conversation around, well, I'm looking for this kind of EBITDA or this number of locations, or maybe in this location or some other identifier altogether. But without specificity, it's difficult to determine what is a good fit for this particular buyer. And I would never want somebody to make a decision based off of the lack of information that they might not have, which makes total sense to me. But the thing is, oftentimes sophisticated buyers, and this sometimes turns sellers off, is that oftentimes sophisticated buyers, they won't have a clear, like, it needs to be X, Y, and Z. And the reason is they don't want to rule out a potential deal with a business that has X, Y, and Z. Maybe that's their criteria, X, Y, and Z, but the business they're looking at in front of them only has X and Y, not Z. They don't want to rule that out because there's opportunity there. And so for sophisticated buyers, they're oftentimes loose early on in terms of what they're looking for. And as the conversations progress, they start to define a little more of, okay, this is the opportunity, this is the opportunity. It is missing some of the other things, but maybe we can make this work. Another thing is, oftentimes, this is maybe a little less sophisticated buyers, but they're oftentimes expecting to find a perfect business. Buyers want to buy a business that has super healthy culture, is strong brand, casually netting north of 25% annually, and are sitting in a solid cash position, have a great team, and they have all these things just sorted out. And if a business is in this condition, it's either not for sale, number one, or it's going to sell for a premium. The thing I would say too, for if you're looking to purchase a coffee roastery, don't let the fact that this business you're looking at doesn't seem to be perfect, don't let that hinder you from exploring, maybe this might make sense. Very quickly, I'll give you an example of a situation like this. Earlier this year, I was looking to purchase a coffee roasting business, and in the process, learned that their debt position, early on, I should say, I learned their debt position, they're super way over leveraged, meaning, and it was not good debt. It was not debt that was helping them grow and scale. It was tied up in a piece of furniture that they will never use. And which might be hard to believe that there was that much debt, but it was. And it wasn't just one thing, it was a series of decisions that led them to this astronomical amount of debt. And as a result, during that conversation, as we were going through this, I initially was very turned off by the debt because I was thinking, this is a year's worth of total income is what's tied up. And I'm not saying net, I'm saying a year's worth of gross for this business is tied up in this furniture. This is crazy. No way. This doesn't make any sense to me at all. And I'm very out. But as I started digging in a little deeper, I started to realize that there were some structural things with how the business was functioning, some of the decisions they were making on the front line in their cafes was withholding them from actually making more money, which actually made the debt look a little bit less scary. The point that I'm trying to make here is that in this process of going through and learning about what their debt position was, how much they were selling, what their wholesale program looked like, what their cold brew program looked like, looking at the entire business, I still decided not to move forward because it just wasn't worth what they were needing for it. And because the debt just completely it was just way over leveraged on the debt side of things. But I wouldn't have known that if I had just heard, okay, you gross X amount a year, and this is how much your debt leverage is, I'm going to run away. No, we had to go through the process to determine, is there something else I'm maybe missing that might actually make this deal make sense, even with the debt? The reason why you don't want to make hard metrics early on is to determine if there is some sort of vanity metric we're looking at to determine if this business is worth it or not. Let's say a wild debt leverage number. If that is something that's going to scare you, you need to be able to say, I'm willing to take the next step to learn more to sort out. Maybe there is opportunity here that I just can't quite see yet. Now, back to what we were talking about. Sellers commonly underestimate the timeline to close, just like buyers similarly underestimate the timeline to source and buy. It can take a lot longer to find a deal for your business. And once a buyer is interested, they will need to go through the vetting and due diligence process as well. And even in a perfect world, let's say everything goes great, you're all ready to go, and it takes 3 months. Awesome. Secondly, sellers often either overvalue their business or dramatically undervalue it. And I get it. Your business is your baby and you see the emotional value, but when someone is buying your business, they're literally buying a business. They don't care what you feel about it. They're literally looking at numbers, and it does have to work for them. We need to make sure this is based off of what your business is actually worth, not what you think it's worth, and not based off of speculation. On the flip side of the coin, you need to understand that just because maybe you haven't been paying yourself, or maybe you have been reinvesting everything back into the business so you can grow to get 2 more locations or whatever it is, just because you might feel discouraged with where your business is at, it doesn't necessarily mean that your business is worth what you think and feel it's worth. It might be worth a lot more than what you're considering when you look at the vast ocean of information that's in front of you, such as your assets, your cash position, your product, what's on the horizon for you. There's definitely things that you're sometimes, because we're so close to the business, sometimes we miss that, oh, this is valuable. I'm sure you've heard the saying, the fish knows the least about water. Sometimes, I'm not saying you don't know anything about your business, but what I am saying is that sometimes we can miss things about our business because we're so close to it and we're with it every single day. And so it's important to remember that. So as we wrap up, a good way to expedite this process, if you're buying, be flexible with deal structure and don't get hung up on vanity metrics. If you're buying, plan for a 6+ month sourcing timeline and a 6 to 12 month vetting process. If it happens faster, great. If not, then you don't have to stress about it. If you're selling, get clear on your debt, leverage, and the assets that you own outright. If you're selling, organize your ownership structure, key ownership documents, and get all that really, really tight and clear. And lastly, make sure your P&L, cash flow report, and sales data is both usable and accurate because they're going to need to see that to be able to determine if it makes sense to purchase your business. Out of curiosity, are you exploring selling your roastery or perhaps you'd like to purchase one? I'd be happy to chat with you. You can schedule a time with me below. Go to my website, hit the connect tab. You'll get right there.